TLO, what's pop? We are on kick.com. We are not live today. But you can leave a like, comment, subscribe, turn on your post notification bells, man. Let's continue to grow the family from Chicago to the UK. Right here is the channel. If there's any highlights from a live that you've missed, only the highlights such as shorts will be on here. But if you follow me on kick.com, K-I-C-K, you can replay the lives and things of that nature. We do have Kick exclusives where we only watch certain shows on Kick, such as what did we watch yesterday? What's that show called with the driving, with the people who be driving? Damn, I forgot the name. But we watched Carl Pilkington, Moaning of Life. We watch. I'll think of the name later. But we also got Patreon. We got merch. And we got a Discord as well, man. Make sure you join the Discord. It's important for, for things of that nature on Kick. It's important to be on Kick with that. Damn, I'm lost for words today because it is. Mortician on the worst thing she has seen. 19 minutes with Land Bible. This right here should be interesting. Top Gear is what we watched on Kick yesterday. So we started Top Gear on there. Morning of Life is going to be on there. Faulty Towers, I think, is going to be on there. They won. And yeah, should be lit, man.
Can you tell me when and why did you first decide that you want to become a mortician?
Good question. Because honestly, who just wakes up like, yeah, I'm going to be a mortician? Like, what happened?
I was really interested in biology when I was really young, probably about 8 or 9. And then my granddad died actually when I was about 9. And he had a seizure in front of me. And I think I was just so shocked by that and just so interested in what happened that I just really wanted to know everything I could about pathology.
Can you explain what does...
It's traumatizing.
In the UK, a mortuary technician assists the pathologist.
What does a mortician do?
In the UK, a mortuary technician assists the pathologist with the autopsies. Once we've received a body, we need to get some information from the coroner's office usually, because there's only sort of so many reasons why you might have a post-mortem if you live in the UK. So basically, if you're a person who is terminally ill, say, for example, and the doctor knows what your cause of death is, and they're happy to sign a death certificate, then you won't have to have a post-mortem. But for everything else, you will. So, for example, if somebody's like a young man and they die at the gym, or if you're a suicide, or somebody homeless from the street, all of those would need a post-mortem. They'd usually need a coronial post-mortem.
What does that mean, coronial?
It basically means that the coroner is involved, and the coroner makes the decision that the post-mortem needs to...
I ain't gonna lie, this is a pretty lady. I ain't gonna lie. Just a little side note I thought I should mention, man. My bad.
Go ahead, because the coroner needs to have a few questions answered, such as, who is this person? When did they die? Why did they die? He or she would come in and start examining those organs and the outside of the body as well. And while they did that, we would then open the head. So we would use a scalpel to take the skin off the head, and we call it reflecting it. We reflect the skin forwards, a bit like peeling an orange, and then use a bone saw, a specific saw, to get through the skull. So that will be your main sort of type of autopsy in the UK. And then the other type is a forensic autopsy, and that is when a crime has been committed. All mortuary technicians deal with forensic cases. We do...
Dr. Sherlock. In the show Sherlock, the forensic technician, she liked him. Okay.
Routine coronial cases. We do baby autopsies, children's autopsies, and high-risk cases as well. So we're all trained to do, the sort of whole gamut of the different ways and the different types of people that die. So for the most part, that actually means opening up the cadaver, taking a lot of the specimens and samples, things like toxicology and histology, the reconstruction of the body. And then once the doctor's gone, we deal with the family, we assist with viewings. So yeah, basically we are the people that make the mortuary, run like clockwork.
I'm about to ask ChatGPT to build
cadaver is a human cadaver is what they cadaver. That meaning that they popped up on the screen is not directly.
If I was to go into work and carry out, a routine coronial autopsy, I would be in the autopsy room first before the pathologist appears. And what I would do is I'd weigh the body, measure, often undress the deceased, and carry out the actual sort of incision, and the evisceration is what we call it. So we make an incision in the body and remove all of the abdominal organs ready for the pathologist. We remove the intestines in one sort of big long string because it is worth examining them. You can have things such as diverticulitis, which is a disease of the intestine. So we do remove them, and we remove them anyway just because to leave them in the body it would be a bit unsanitary. It's best to remove all of the organs from the abdominal cavity because then we can sort of clean it up and pack it properly, and all of the organs then go into what we call a viscera bag. And often the viscera bags are biodegradable. So they're sort of like clear plastic bags. We put all the organs in it, put it back into the body, and then we can stitch the body up and make sure all the orifices are packed, and then there's no leaking. So when the body then goes on, whether it might go to be cremated.
That's disgusting.
Or will be buried. The idea is that the bag will decompose inside the body, and the organs effectively then go back, with the body. The main piece of equipment that we use to open a dead body or eviscerate the dead body is called a PM40. So it's actually like a scalpel blade, but it's a lot bigger. It's about sort of 3 inches long. And that's what we'll use to do the Y incision. Sometimes we call it an I incision. We'll just do a straight incision. It really depends on the mortuary. We use scalpels as well for things like reflecting the skull back to remove the brain. And we use a bone saw on the skull. And this is an oscillating saw. It doesn't rotate. It oscillates back and forth, just like a saw that is used to take a cast off. Okay. So the reason for this is that it will then only go through hard matter. So when you're taking a cast off somebody, obviously the blade will touch the leg, but it won't damage it in any way because the blade oscillates. And that's the same saw that we use.
I didn't know that was what an oscillating blade did. Okay, I just learned something clean new. An oscillating blade stops because it feels something saw back and forth. But if it spin, it would okay.
We use rib shears to remove the sort of chest plate here, and they are big. They're about this big, and you sort of have to,
rib
give
shears,
it some welly.
Scissors.
And we use lots of different forceps, tweezers, that sort of thing, and nail clippers and things like that in forensic postmortems.
Nail clippers.
I guess a very popular question about the smell of the dead bodies. Is there a bad smell? How do you deal with it?
I often get asked about the smell of dead bodies. I have to say, it's one of those things that you just sort of get used to. And I think sometimes
No, ma'am. No. I don't believe you. You're not going to sit here and tell me you get used to a dead body smell. No. It's one of the most horrific smells that you could ever smell. Especially one that's been sitting there for a minute.
Prefer that smell to, the smell on the central line when it's really packed. There's something about that smell. It's one of those things that you just sort of get used to. And I think sometimes I prefer that smell to, the smell on the central line when it's really...
There's something about you we don't know, ma'am. You prefer the smell of a dead body over the smell of the central line in London? Over the train?
Packed. There's something about dead people, they smell, but it seems like it's okay, it's not their fault, and it's just scientific. So I don't mind it so much, but you can get a lot of clues from how a person died by how they smell. So for example, alcohol has got a really distinct sweet smell when somebody's kind of had far too much of it, and they may have had alcohol poisoning. There's a couple of other things, various gases that you can smell. So what we definitely don't do is what people tend to do on TV shows and put Vaseline up their nose, or like not Vaseline, like Vicks Vapor Rub or something menthol. We don't do that because you need to be able to smell the body as part of the examination.
Do you need to empty the bladder or anything like that?
Often the deceased has a full bladder because at the time of death, if
released.
the muscles all contract, the urine stays in the bladder. It's actually possible to take the bladder out and keep it full, so you can sort of hold it up like a bit of a beach ball.
And how do you know? You've tried it. That's.
Sometimes we have to perforate the bladder so that we can get a urine sample.
Okay.
And sometimes people do void their bowels as well, so it can totally depend. Not to sort of make light of deceased their body processes, but we do get an awful lot of flatulence or voiding of bowels.
I heard that happens when you pass away, when you get unalived, you void your bowels because you like the anus region relaxes or something. I don't know. I heard gas as well.
We have some people who come in with an erection. We have some people who've come in and they've voided voided their testicles. I couldn't think of a word. We have an exciting array of
voided their testicle? How?
Bodily fluids and bodily noises from.
Oh, voided their testicle. Wow, I didn't even know what she was talking about. I'm like, voided the I got it.
The deceased. I think what really got me interested in pathology is this sort of idea that the body is a bit like a canvas, and everything that a person does in their life or around the time of death is sort of on that canvas and makes up a picture. So you sort of look at various different artifacts and think, oh, okay, well, this person has bruises all down their shins and they smell like alcohol, so the chances are they're an alcoholic, because what alcoholics will do is wander around their house and they'll sort of bash into bits of furniture because they're not quite steady, and so they get really sort of typical type of bruising pattern on their shins. Another thing might be, for example, you can see that people are smokers because of their yellow fingers, but particularly with old people who've got white hair, they can end up with a yellow sort of piece of hair here, and it's called a nicotine-stained forelock. So you can look straight away and see that this.
That's what that is. What I see in people with the white hair, and they be having that yellow.
Person is a heavy smoker. So lots of things like that. Track marks from using drugs, various different tattoos. They can build up a really interesting picture of the person, as they were alive and maybe as to how they died.
You may have tried drop shipping in the past, and you might have started to get sent.
This is really interesting. I didn't think I was going to be this interested in this.
When it comes to restoring the deceased and reconstructing them, we do a certain level of restoration, particularly if a family member really, really wants to see them at the mortuary. In the UK, embalming isn't as popular as it is in other countries. So when a person is getting embalmed and reconstructed, that's when you would put makeup on. So that's not really our job. Our job is just the basic reconstruction of the deceased. And then they would go on to a funeral directors, and they would probably have an embalmer there or somebody who would possibly put makeup on the deceased for a viewing. But it's not as common in the UK as it is in America, for example.
Very popular in America.
We obviously like to try and do what we can for families, but we will sometimes say you might be better doing this viewing at the funeral directors, where there's been a lot more reconstruction. So, for example, a case that comes to my mind is a man who jumped in front of a train, and when we actually received his body, his buttocks were at the front, so
his what?
Sort of twisted round, and one of the feet was off, one of the hands was off, the head was a mess, but the family really wanted to see the deceased. So I sewed him all back together, basically. After the autopsy, the pathologist helped me turn the back to front again, and I think it took about 4 or 5 hours to stitch everything back together.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Couldn't do a lot with the head because it was very fractured from the train injury, but put a lot of cotton wool in there, tried to get all the bones and skin in the correct shape.
Yo.
And then put a bandage around it so the family could see him. And, they were really relieved about that. And it was difficult, but it was rewarding.
How do you feel about them? Do you look at them again? I mean, they're dead, but they're people. What are kind of your relationship with them, if I can call that that?
I think, sometimes it can sound a bit gruesome, but it can be quite exciting. When you come into work in the morning, you don't know what is going to be in those fridges, who may have come in overnight, depending as well on which type of mortuary you work in. Some are run by the council and some are hospital mortuaries. So it's actually quite exciting. It's a bit like opening presents on Christmas Day, which probably sounds quite callous in a way.
Absolutely.
But it's because we love the job that we're doing. I love.
You have to love this job. There's no way that you just go into work and you like, oh, I don't want to be here today. Hand me them chest lung forceps. No, you can't just.
Love that job. And it's therefore really interesting to me to get, a variety of different cases that I can, use to extend my skill set. And also to know that I'm going to help a lot of different families find closure. So yeah, it is exciting to get the new bodies in. And the first thing we do is we tend to check them over and check that there's no belongings on them, anything expensive. And often we'll do a sort of estimate their size, estimate their weight, and yeah, it just sets you up for the rest of the day because you know that you're going to be going to do some really interesting postmortems.
With time, you kind of obviously there is respect to the people,
Yeah.
and obviously that always has to be there. But I guess you kind of have developed a sense of humor over all of that.
When I first started in London, when I moved to London, I was working in a mortuary. I can't say which one. But there was a technician there who used to think it was very funny to climb into the fridge in a body bag. And when the sort of new starter came, you can see what's coming, we'd get taken to the fridge and you'd sort of sit up and you'd have a heart attack. So, I've experienced.
It's not funny. That's not the type of humor that you know what I'm saying?
It's that sort of thing.
Seeing dead bodies every day, seeing death, does it change your attitude to death? Does it change your attitude to all of that?
Oh, it's interesting because part of the sort of public engagement work that I do is all about sort of mortality salience, which is about this idea that the more aware of death you are, the more appreciative of life you are, and there are a lot of sort of studies in this.
What's that would seem right, but coming from Chicago, they're very aware of death in Chicago, but that don't make them appreciate it more. That make them go crazy about taking it still. I think Chicago people have God complexes. They just love, you know what I'm saying? Removing life from somebody is crazy.
And I think there's an aspect of truth to that, certainly, and an aspect of sort of feeling grateful at the end of the day that your husband's walked in at the end of a working day and not been hit by a bus, like some people's husbands will have been. But it can also, I think you just have to make sure that you focus on good things as well. Obviously it can get a bit dramatic and it can be a bit too much, a bit overwhelming, especially things like, for example, I worked on the 7/7 bombs, the deceased, from those bombings. And you really need to sort of make sure that you take time to look at from those
7/7 bombs, a terrorist attack on London public transit.
bombings.
I remember we did a reaction to that. It's crazy. R.I.P. to those people.
Yeah, you really need to sort of make sure that you take time to look at the beauty in the world as well. Otherwise, I think you could get very, very down and have quite dark periods, I think.
The whole last 2-3 years in Chicago for me was dark. So I understand. Literally, life was so not mine, but my outlook on life was so if it didn't matter, not mine personally, but if somebody tried me, it was that. It didn't matter. And that going around with that attitude will turn you really, really dark. It'll turn you really, really dark. You know what I'm saying? I'm out of that now, I'm out of that place, but yeah.
Things stay with you. How do you handle that?
I think some things at the time certainly have. After the London bombs, for example, that was like sort of really, really intense experience. You know, and I was a bit afraid to get on a tube for a while. I think, you know, a lot of people would be. But you just, yeah, you can't let it affect you really, because you're there to do a job and you're there to, you know, find out who's done like, you know, the most heinous thing or what's happened to a person. So you know, you need to focus on that. And I think for the most part, people like us who want to be doing this job have that ability anyway, just to separate it. Otherwise, I don't think we'd be doing the job in the first place. I'd obviously dealt with a lot of people who jumped in front of trains and things like that, or jumped from a roof and had been in, say, 2 or 3 pieces, or had an incredibly fractured skull. But I think with the bombings, we were there. I was in London for 2.5 weeks in a hotel, and we started with the larger victims and we kind of got down to the smaller and smaller chunks. And I think it was just to have to see people in that state, you know, and know that they'd been kind of scraped off the tracks and off the sides of the carriages, and, you know, after this horrendous attack had happened. That's probably the worst thing that I've seen.
That sounds crazy.
Moving from the job of mortician, so that you now work with specimen, can you explain what that is and kind of talk about your current job a bit?
Is that a toilet?
Yeah.
You mean to tell me we've been living here all this time and you never told me we...
Yeah, so as a pathology technician, or APT, I was qualified up to senior level, but after that you end up sort of going more into office work, and it really wasn't what I wanted to do. I always wanted to be quite hands-on with the dead. So I kind of sidestepped. I applied for a job at a pathology museum, Bart's Pathology Museum, and I'm still there, and it's a historical collection of body parts. So there's about 5,000 or 6,000 jars or specimen pots, or specimens, you might call them, and a lot of them are very historical. So the oldest one that we have is from 1750.
How big the room is.
Things like syphilis, we've got lobotomy specimens, rickets, there's a plague specimen, leprosy, all of these really, you know,
She sounds so passionate about this.
bizarre and like older sort of antiquated conditions. Are all represented in these pots. So we've got, you know, a hand in a pot, a foot, a penis, all sorts of things. And I basically repair them. You know, if they're looking a bit old, they might need the fluid changed, they might need to be rehung in the pots. The pots need to be cleaned. And that's my job sort of as a technical curator. We encourage people to come in and learn about death in various different ways. And I like to try and be as imaginative as possible. So
I just don't want to know. I understand where you're coming from, but like, that'll unlock a lot of fears. Dang, I don't want to die like that. I don't want to unalive like that.
for example, we had an edible body farm a few years ago. So I don't know if you guys know what a body farm is, but
No.
basically it's where bodies get donated and they are placed in various different sort of positions to be studied. So the first one opened in Tennessee years ago, and there's a few of them across the world. And it's how scientists study the effects of death on corpses. So what we did was we had like it sounds really crazy, but we had an edible body farm where we had people who'd made cookies of the different stages of decay. We had somebody who'd made a huge
Bro, I'm not coming there eating no cookies that look like dead, that look like
body. It was a decomposing corpse made from red velvet cake.
Hell
It was
no.
gorgeous. We had like maggot cupcakes, just absolutely everything, and cocktails based on congealed blood. It was really good fun, but it was all to raise awareness of the fact that we don't have a body farm in the UK.
I'll throw up.
We really should have one. And there's a lot of campaigning that myself and other colleagues do to try and get a body farm in the UK. So it just raised a lot of awareness for that cause.
What qualities you think are the most important ones for the work you do?
I think you obviously have to be really interested in pathology to do this sort of job, and you need to be have a real attention to detail, I think, and an eye for detail, because you really have to make sure that you're collecting as much evidence visually as you can, and I think a certain level of resilience as well. It's not for everybody. You have to have a bit of a tough stomach. A lot of people, who might be squeamish about blood or insects, I mean, they wouldn't last a day. There's been plenty of times when I've had to do autopsies on decomposing bodies. They're covered in maggots, and there are cheese skipper flies that they jump up and down. You find maggots in your bra afterwards. They jump up and down. They're covered in maggots, and there are cheese skipper flies that they jump up and down. You know, you find maggots in your bra afterwards. So you have to be quite tough, I think, to do a job like this. I think that the more people know about pathology, the better.
Maggots in your bra after work is crazy.
Because, you know, knowledge is power. And I think it's important for people to know about the processes and things that happen to the dead once they do come to a mortuary or funeral directors. So I think there's this sort of aspect of us that we kind of need to be with our dead for that cycle of life to sort of sink in and for us to, you know, understand.
That's crazy. This wild. You a wild girl. I see that face tattoo. You wild. TL, leave a like, comment. I'm gone.